I've got a few slides here that I've put together, and then I'll switch over to another slideshow from a friend who is in engineering in Montreal, and hopefully you'll find this interesting enough. CBC used to, for CBC audio, it used to mean CBC radio, SRC, which is our French component, or CBC television. There were just those two things. Nowadays, if you look at CBC's delivered services, for radio, we've got all of these various Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio Music, Sirius SM, which CBC is a 20% stakeholder in, and many, many channels. For CBC television, there are a number of different delivery networks. There's the main CBC network in English and French, documentary channel, et cetera, et cetera. And then for CBC digital delivery, which has become a huge component for any broadcaster now, and it's getting to the point where it's going to be far more important than over-the-air broadcast. We've got all of these different platforms of CBC News, CBC Music, CBC Sports, et cetera, et cetera. And then, in addition, there are a few other more specialized things, CBC North, the Olympics, and all of those amazing sites that we're running simultaneously with all of the live events. CBC Kids to shape the minds of the kids for the future. And things like Kids News just launched this past week. So many things going on at CBC. It's no longer audio for two different things. In the panel that was up here earlier, we were talking about the fact that, I think it was Josh was talking about the fact that you basically knew where your stuff was going in the olden days when you were mixing. You knew what the targets were and how to present to that medium. When I started in the industry, you'd go in, you'd align a 2-inch tape machine using a screwdriver. You'd mix in stereo and mono. The mono was for AM radio. The stereo was going to probably be mastered on vinyl for a record, and you knew exactly how to work with those mediums. Now, that's no longer part of what we have to worry about. But we still have many standards we have to think about as we're delivering stuff. And nowadays, when I first came to CBC, it was the first all-digital broadcast facility in the world, I believe. We had people coming in from Japan and places to tour the facility because everything was digital. And nowadays, we're switching more and more towards audio over IP, and I have no idea where to put my screwdriver with that stuff. So the thing with a company like CBC, national broadcaster, in fact, when I started CBC, in terms of number of transmitters and the amount of area that it had to cover, it was the biggest broadcasting network in the world because Canada's huge, not a huge population, but CBC's mandate was to reach every corner of the country, coast to coast to coast, as they say. When you're steering a network of that size, it's a lot like steering a ship. You got to look way ahead in the future. You have to be certain of the course because it's expensive and it's a huge build-out, et cetera. And you don't want to wind up on the rocks like that ship in the Mediterranean. You don't take chances. You have to very carefully think through all of these things, research them, et cetera. Montreal right now is building what will be the new version of what the Toronto Broadcast Centre was when it was built. It's a new facility from the ground up that will be built to host all of these different digital platforms out of one facility. And from that, they're really pointing to what the future is going to be. And I'm going to show you this little slide presentation, if I can figure out how to work my computer. This is from Felix Poulin in Montreal Engineering. And this presentation was originally done for the NABA. And a lot of the stuff in this presentation, for a guy who sits in a dark corner pushing faders, it's way over my head. But I think a lot of these slides are self-explanatory. These are all guys way smarter than me. And Felix, I've known for years. He and I worked together, me as an end user, him as the lead engineer, on a CRC metering project where we were figuring out how to meter loudness in real time so that we could hit target dial norm loudnesses. And that project, along with its 1770 Center, went on to win a technical Emmy. So he's a very experienced guy. He went from Montreal to Geneva to work with the EBU, spent a few years working with EBU there, helping them with their standards, and then came back to Canada, and he's now working in Montreal again. So these are the objectives that, or the agenda that is set out for them for building this facility in Montreal. It's a massive project, and I'll just take you through this very quickly. If you have questions for me later, I might be able to answer one or two of them, but again, a lot of this stuff is over my head. So we want to increase the ability to adapt to a market in a faster way. Customers are expecting more and more different things, as Josh outlined in his presentation, from the perspective of Apple and all of the developers, etc. Everybody's always looking for operational efficiencies, less cost on gear, less cost on real estate, less cost on labor, as they like to call us. So part of our mandate at CBC for the past 15 years has been to reduce our infrastructure and our real estate portfolio as well. They don't want CBC to be in the real estate business. They want us to be in the business of distributing and broadcasting Canadian stories. And then improve risk management. This is making sure that stuff works, making sure that there's a connectivity in the event of disaster, all that kind of stuff. So flexibility, scalability, and agility are the catchwords in the design of this. In terms of scalability, they want to build stuff that they can easily add a bunch of stuff to and then take it away. Perfect example of that is the Olympics that we just did, where the number of employees involved in working on that project alone was about 2,000. And then all of a sudden, when the Olympics are over, the building's empty and there's nothing going on there, and we don't need all of that equipment in the building anymore. So the ability to just tag onto the system that's there is critical. So go to the project overview. This is what the new facility is going to look like. That building in the lower part there. And the tower you see behind is the old CBC facility, which I think is going to either be turned into condominiums, or I'm not sure what their plans are with that. This is all slated to be finished and up and running in 2020. So again, this gives you an idea of the size of the facility and the new facility. They're trying to build it so that there's more above ground, etc., just like a nicer place for people to work. So now we're getting into the technical meat of the design. And in the future is everything over IP, audio, video, and so everything will be based on SMPTE ST2110 for video, AES 67 for audio, largely software-based for everything. They want to converge all of the media so that instead of like radio producing a show, digital media producing a show, television producing a show, content is produced irrespective of platform, and it can all merge together and be played out the same servers to all of the various delivery networks, whether it's Facebook Live, whether it's YouTube, whether it's over-air broadcast, all happens at the same time from the same servers. They want to be able to have this highly automated to reduce costs and hopefully improve reliability. And they want to keep it open for app developers that can hook in. So in other words, APIs, it's a way of having a system that the connection is there for other things to be able to interface with. Josh can probably answer this kind of stuff better than I can, but this previous slide was a video of the building, which I don't have online right now, but this is basically what the building will be. 10 floors, 4 automated control rooms, camera control room, master control room, like all highly automated stuff. In post-production, they're going to have like 32 editing workstations. That's only going to feed 4 audio mixing suites. So the vast majority of stuff will be mixed in the edit suite, which is very much like the way CBC in Toronto operates now. All of this stuff will be interconnected so that it all is shared material off servers for editing and for delivery and all that kind of stuff. Project schedule. So again, they're planning on having people moving in 2020. So that's a pretty steep timeline. And when you look back at the standards that are being employed and the fact that it's all audio and video all over internet protocol stuff, there are a lot of standards that, like AES 67, I think, was only nailed down in the past year as a solid delivery platform. The video platform is still going through huge changes. There are other things being added onto these standards all the time, like in addition to AES 67, there's AES 70, which I think Anthony's heavily involved with, which talks about control data and so on being sent down the same pipe. So all kinds of things that really aren't ready to take to market yet, and yet we have to make this building and build it to the standard, because that is the future. Anyway, you can see where the construction is now, or at least that's probably a few weeks ago now. There was a virtual visit here, which I don't have access to, but basically, well, I might have access to. No, I don't. Basically, if you look at it, it takes you through the building as it's being built, and it's all racks and racks and racks of servers and switches and that kind of stuff. It's not your old style CBC of, audio control rooms and video control rooms and big camera rooms and that kind of stuff. So much of it is IT based. Okay, so there's been a lot of ongoing testing, because when this is up and running in 2020, it actually has to work, which is kind of a funny thing. So there are regional station prototypes that they've been testing that all have to tie into the main building, and this is all happening through 25 to 100 gig Ethernet connections. So for those of you who are really into IT and that end of things, this is kind of how the map for all of this goes together. I understand stuff like SDI. That's a format that I'm familiar with. Audio and video muxed together down one line. In the future, it's all going to be video down its own stream, audio down its own stream, control data down another stream, and everything engaging with a PTP clock, precision time protocol clock, that will lock everything together. So you no longer have to package everything in such a way that it all goes together. And this gives way more flexibility in terms of different possibilities for video resolutions, different possibilities for the number of channels of audio and how you're streaming the audio with it. So it's a much more open way of doing this kind of delivery. And the great thing about it, it probably says it in one of these future slides, but the great thing about it is we're piggybacking now on the IT industry. And when you look at the video industry, I read on a PowerPoint a few days ago when I was doing a little bit of research for this, the video industry typically spends on research, $10 million a year on research and building new gear. The IT industry is $10 billion a year. So to tap into that, the economy of scale is huge, the pool of talent is huge, and the kids that are coming up today, they're not going to be guys who, spent their time wiring together a Heath kit and then, getting the nice speakers and setting them up and listening to their vinyl record that they've carefully cleaned before they put on, These are going to be guys who grew up on video games and interfacing computers and playing with software and that kind of stuff. And so by building an IT-based broadcast center, there's going to be a huge pool of young talent that can come in, and those with audio interests will go into the audio area of that. But the expertise clearly now is understanding that thing that I think it was Anthony was asking, how many people here understand what a subnet mask is? Hands up? Not me. But the kids today know all of this stuff, and so that's what we're building for. So this is the system that they built as a proof of concept. This is all based on 2110 and AES 67. So they tested a bunch of gear, put it together, and wanted to make sure that this would all work in a production system, and also test its UHD behavior to make sure it was, future-proofed. So if you look at the requirements here, they want a single-based software solution that will look after television, web, and radio all at the same time. They want the whole ecosystem to be built from cots. Now, I don't think that's single beds that you set up. I think that's consumer, off-the-shelf items. In other words, stuff that's already available for the IT industry. So that instead of having to get specialized stuff made specifically for this particular kind of video or this particular kind of audio, they want to just pull stuff off the shelf. I give you my own example of that for a system that I have at home. Audio over IP, and it plays out of my computer, which only has one Ethernet port. So I phone up the company and say, well, how do I run my Artist Series fader pack and your audio interface at the same time? They said, just go to a shop and buy a cheap Netgear switch, it'll work. This is the kind of structure we're trying to build here. Just pull stuff off the rack and have it work. This pretty picture with all of these colors shows the basic layout of the target design for Toronto and Montreal. And it's full of all those terms that I don't use in my everyday life as an audio mixer. But it's all local area networks and streaming and based on over the internet protocol. This was the proof of concept playout system that they did just to show that when they scale it up for that 2020 move-in date, it's actually going to work. So they needed to test specific stuff. And these are the lessons that they learned from it. Everybody has different ideas of what consumer off-the-shelf stuff is, or commodity off-the-shelf stuff is. Each individual has different ideas about what that stuff is and how much modification is going to have to go into it to make it work. And CBC defines this as for our purposes, it's something that doesn't require any modification to do its job. The lesson they learned is that the stuff that is specialized hardware based for ST2110, the specialized stuff actually works very nicely. Maybe we'll just stick with that kind of stuff for now. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's like, It works a lot of the time, but not always. The first generation gateways, etc., pretty limited in their abilities at this stage. So we are really early on the curve for this kind of a production center. And then this is a great illustration. This is Felix's sense of humor, I think, coming out here. It's like a battery, in his opinion. You get the great battery, it can do all of this kind of stuff. And it's got to run these networks that can do all of this kind of stuff. But you put the two together, and it's not going to work all the time. So there are big challenges in terms of putting these kinds of things together. And this is what they found out, is that PTP is hypercritical. PTP, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, that is the thing that governs the switching of everything. It governs when packets come in, when they go out, how they synchronize with everything else. They're all numbered. They're all tied into, if you have the fully professional system, something like a Tektronix clock that is GPS locked and unbelievably accurate. And this is what makes the stuff function well, and that's what this is all based around. But they don't like to play with the sort of earlier versions or anything that has a lot of jitter. So CBC is looking at things like Ansible, and I looked that up earlier today. It's a company that is looking at ways of interfacing all of this stuff together and making everybody talk to each other happily. I don't know any more than that about it, but if you're interested, that's available on the web to do further research about. Okay, so the conclusion. That was our wish list, to have everything ST2110 and AES67, and have it all UHD ready and a universal audio system, et cetera, et cetera. The software should all be virtualized to maximize resource pooling and have interchangeable hardware for everybody. They want media to all converge into one place so that they can send it all out and have it all work on every platform. Automated provisioning, manageable updating, all that kind of stuff. Hypercritical, especially when everything is software-based and you can't take downtime to update and that kind of thing. And open APIs for control. This is to allow all different kinds of software-based stuff to interface with the system and talk nicely and get along. The marketplace right now versus what CBC is trying to do, it's 75% Dante and SDI, so it's a long way off being AES67 or SMPTE 2110. We're in the early days of this software. Media coverage is still 75% segmented, so 75% of the stuff that's out there is specific to that delivery platform. The automated provisioning, they're at the testing stage still with Ansible, and about 50% of the APIs for control are adopted, not widely. So this shows you the pyramid of how this development is going to work and roll out in the future. So we're really just at the tip of the pyramid right now, tip of the iceberg. As Felix has put in this slide. There's a lot of work still to be done. Now, one of the great things about involvement with AES and involvement with SMPTE and NAB and NABA, all these different organizations, is that the standards are being set, and there's a lot of very smart people who are sorting this out so that as we move into the future, we will have something solid that hopefully works by 2020. So again, flexibility, agility, scalability. We want consumer off-the-shelf stuff or commonly off-the-shelf stuff for IT. And the conclusion of the proof of concept is that it works, but it's still got a long, long way to go. And so that's the end of that part of the slide presentation from Montreal Engineering. And that's what the future of CBC will look like. At CBC in Toronto, when we were broadcasting, I think probably the biggest thing that we've done in recent years was the Winter Olympic broadcast in conjunction with Pyeongchang. And if I get to my other slideshow here, I can pick it up. So for those Olympics, all of the talent, or virtually all of the talent, was in Pyeongchang. And there were a few people helping the talent down there. There were people with microphones. There were people with cameras, that kind of stuff. But virtually all of that stuff was fed back to Toronto, mostly in real time, over a cobbled together system of IT and SDI and AC3 digital audio. And while they were shooting live in Pyeongchang, they were being directed live, switched live, recorded onto servers in Toronto. So here we have the Olympics in Pyeongchang. This is the team that was down there in front of the camera and working from down there in cobbled together facilities that were then networked back to Toronto. And you can see how kludgy some of this is. I mean, that's the front 3 channels of a 5.1 system, not exactly set to ITU spec. Again, another shot of one of the teams down there. Canadian Olympic team that would have been doing an interview with these guys, which would have been directed in Toronto and going live to air in Toronto as it was being directed down there. The wonderful Kelly Brown, who anyone who has done any live TV in Toronto has probably worked with her at some point. Keeping the talent happy, making sure microphones work, that kind of stuff. The reason why I'm showing you these pictures is that there's a lot of technology involved in this, but it's the people that were working this technology that made it all happen. So yeah, it's great to have all of the technology, but this was a team of, by the time the final credits rolled, it was about 2,000 people on the credit roll, actively involved in the on-air production of the Olympics. 12 hours of the audio came through this man in Toronto, Roberto, and the other 12 went through Brett Mannion, who was sort of the lead mixer in Toronto, through the CalRec console, which I have another slide of. This is another just on-set picture. Another shot of the team. So these guys are in Pyeongchang. They're being directed in Toronto by these guys on the 10th floor of the building at CBC. And from the time they press the button to say something to a floor director in Pyeongchang, and the guy or the person on the floor heard the comment, there was a massive delay between the button that they were pressing and the person down there hearing it of almost 2 frames, which for anyone who's worked on a live remote in the past, that's unheard of. Typically, it would be many seconds. So these kinds of delays down to 2 frames between here and the other side of the globe, it just boggles my mind how they do it. interviewing a team after a victory, etc. There's the big CalRec console. Virtually all the feeds came back through this console and then fanned out to various different airspeeds for recording. So when this console was being manned, there was some stuff that was happening live. There was a lot of stuff that was happening in the background, all routed through here and all being recorded in Toronto. 12 hours a day by this man, the other 12 by Brett Mannion, who I don't have a photograph of, but a lot of you probably know him. Once that content was recorded, all of these desks were manned 24/7 by a whole pile of people who were screening stuff as it came in and logging all of the shots, saying, here's a Canadian entry, they just won, they just wiped out on the ski slope, they just, were on the podium for accepting their medal. All of that stuff, that information was happening in real time as it was being fed into the building and logged. And then that information was sent to producers and editors who would then put together a whole pile of stuff that was ready to go to air, like basically edited as it's coming in. The feed is still being recorded as they're editing. They finished their edit before the feed finished recording because it had to go to air before the next event was about to happen in that category. And all of that stuff, it went into about 6 or 8 edit suites at the same time for our presentation part of the Olympics. And it all came down to this one mix room, which was initially manned 10 hours a day by me and 10 hours a day by Rick Starks, one of my co-workers. And by the time we got toward the end of the Olympics, when things were very busy, there was usually an hour or two of overlap between this and another room. So from that, I'll just show you a few clips that came out of the Olympics, and then I have a couple of other things to show you beyond that, just so you get to hear something other than the sound of my voice, which is not the greatest thing to have to listen to. This is typically how the primetime opening would start for the Olympic broadcast. Just go full screen here.
The following is a live presentation of the Pyeongchang 2018 Olympic Winter Games on CBC.
It's a single step. The moment you realize you're good is the moment you know you can be better. Just one step. The step from where you are to where you've dreamt you can be. That you've worked towards, that you've sacrificed for. Because you've always known that it wasn't going to be easy. That you would face hardship. But it's just one step. From great to greatness.
So I'll just say a couple of words about that. The top plate and the end plate were all pre-produced well before the Olympics, but everything that was in the middle of that was basically cut together about they start cutting it together about 6 hours before the broadcast with a creative producer and a creative editor. It would be sent to us in post-audio over the server. We'd output our own AAF files and video files. The AAF files for audio would contain already music, maybe a couple of sound effects they put in the edit suite. We'd have time to just throw a voiceover onto it, maybe a couple of additional sound effects, very minimal, and send it back to them. And typically, for something like that, I would get my edit for something like this at about 4 or 5 in the morning, and I'd have to push it back to them in the video suite to marry their final picture, which they might have still been working on, with my audio about a half an hour later. So it was very quick turnaround, very quick decisions on how you put stuff together, and minimal stuff. And this is all being done in 5.1 audio, full surround sound, with a stereo fold down for the web broadcast as well. Here's another one. This is just a quick promo for the speed skating. We call these ones musicals because basically there's no time to put dialogue and a lot of effects in this stuff. It's just minimal stuff to get people excited to watch the event. And bear in mind that when you watch this, a lot of the footage that came in to cut this video literally came in just a few hours before the video was edited, and it's back on the air, about an hour after this was mixed and pushed back to the server.
Following is a live presentation of the Pyeongchang 2018 Olympic Winter Games on CBC.
So again, you can see that's minimal treatment with sound effect. Basically, you just want to highlight the danger of the sport because it's short track and everybody falls, and those things are very, very sharp. And then music for the energy. Just got a couple of other things here. This was an actual, what we call a medal pack, where we're highlighting a sport because they have just won a medal. And this literally goes to air maybe an hour after they win the sport, because we want to get the word out there that, yeah, some Canadians have won something.
You're in the gold medal position and a chance to do something that hasn't happened in Canada for 20 years. The virtual tie in the red. We'll see if he goes into the green here at the next interval. He does. Cripps is in front.
Could it maybe be enough?
Let's see. This is going to be so tight for Canada. Here he comes through. And it is a tie for the gold medal.
Unbelievable. It's amazing. You could have predicted this.
You wouldn't believe how strong the temptation was to ADR that number one for Canada when you see him on the screen. But this, again, it's like super fast. Turn it around, crank it out, and just make sure that you're delivering the message with a certain amount of energy. This is a little longer, a different kind of thing. This is one of the little featurettes that were shot in the field, sent back to Toronto, chopped together in Toronto, and then posted, and I'll explain why it was sent to Post Audio, because a lot of these things weren't.
We've been doing these house calls, but where did the Olympic houses start? Well, right here, 92 in Barcelona, with nothing but a tent. Fast forward to 2000, the Aussies, well, they didn't know how to speak Dutch, they couldn't get in. So they opened it up to the public. I've been here 2 minutes and I've already spotted the Cooey Curling Clan.
Cooey, cooey, cooey! Cooey, cooey, cooey! 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 Cooey, cooey, cooey!
Sharing some curling love to the long track folk. This is a wall of all of the medalists here in Pyeongchang, each getting their own tile with their names engraved. Big surprise, all speed skaters. It's like quacks, but quack, right?
Yeah.
May I have some quack?
Okay.
It's fantastic. Alright. Time for some bitterballing. It was really hot, which I was warned. For the first time ever, they've got a hotel room that you can rent in the Heineken House. But there's only one, and I've got it. Night.
Now that's the kind of piece that normally would have gone straight to air from the mix suite. They would normally, or from the edit suite, they would normally cut it together, do the mix in the edit suite, do a very basic LCR with dialogue up the center, music left and right, and out it goes. In the case of this one, location recording, people shouting into the microphone, et cetera, probably about 25% of the dialogue on this particular feature had probably about 50% total harmonic distortion. So that's when we get work at Post Audio. They send it to us, can you do anything for us? And it's like, yes, we can do magic. Everybody out there knows that it's RX6. It's not called magic, it's called RX6. But those are the kinds of things that keep us going in Post Audio, and that's why we still have jobs in a useful place, when, even for things like this. And this next one I'm going to play for you, it's the opening for a bobsleigh event. This is toward the end of the Olympics, toward the end of the Winter Olympics. The creative teams have now worked through the bulk of their stuff, much more time on their hands. This is Matt and Andre were the creative team on this. Matt Lazzarini is the producer, and Andre was the creative editor. Both brilliant guys. And then they brought it in to us for audio post. Most of the sound effects and things that you'll hear in this came from the edit suite, just very little touch-ups here and there, and a 5.1 mix.
When flesh meets steel at supersonic speeds, man and machine become one. Enter the Olympic dimension, a one-way ticket right down the line. Push start, load in, and hang on tight. Four-man bobsleigh starts now.
That was kind of fun to work on. And that basically concludes the chunk that I have about the Olympics. The Olympics are not the only thing, of course, that happens at the CBC. CBC's bread and butter for years has been hard-hitting documentary-style production, current affairs, news, that kind of thing. So I'm going to play just a little promo of something that has been a mainstay for CBC for the last 40-some-odd years now.
Coming soon on the Fifth Estate, a spy story about betrayal, lies, and a man who came back from the dead.
Do you think there's any doubt he was killed?
I wouldn't know, but it would appear to me to be their standard policy.
Codenamed Gideon, he was spying in Canada for the Russians. Then he turned double agent for the RCMP, sharing secrets with them about the Soviets. But then, in a twist, he himself was betrayed by an RCMP officer, sent back to Russia, and reportedly executed.
I think that the RCMP, of all people, would have lowered themselves to this sort of thing.
Now, decades later, another twist that no one saw coming. Dead men don't come back from the grave. This spy did.
They had called and said, listen, we've got something we would like you to look at. The first thing I thought was that they were joking with me.
It was so widely assumed, that he had been executed. And then to survive it and come back to Canada. I mean, this is quite a coming around.
I'm Bob McKeown. A real-life spy saga with villains on both sides. That's coming soon on the Fifth Estate.
So that's pretty straightforward. Most of the work on a show like Fifth Estate is dialogue cleanup, a few sound effects here and there, making sure that you can hear all of the dialogue above the music, or is that the other way around? I can never get that straight. That's a big chunk of the kind of work that we do at CBC. But in addressing the one thing that we're talking about, convergence of media, CBC television is not the only part of the broadcaster that's making television now. I have a clip here from the first part of a show that was actually produced by CBC Radio in the CBC Radio studios with their own camera people, edited by their own people, and then the final post-mix, which was basically finished in the edit suite, was just touched up and mastered in post-production audio. And I think this is probably the work of Ron Skinner, or maybe Ron Skinner and Nick Bonin for the music recording.
Hey, welcome to CBC Music's 12 Songs of Christmas. Music and Christmas go together hand in hand. And over the next hour, we'll take care of your Christmas playlist. You'll hear some of your favorite holiday songs performed by some of Canada's greatest musicians.
From now on, your troubles will be miles away.
You know that feeling you get when you look outside and it's just starting to snow? You feel all cozy? This is Nikki Yanofsky singing about that feeling. It's Let It Snow on CBC Music's 12 Songs of Christmas.
Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. And since we've no place to go, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. It doesn't show signs of stopping, and I brought some corn for popping. The lights I turn way down low. Let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. When we finally kiss goodnight, how I hate going out in the storm. But if you really hold me tight, all the way home I'll be warm. The fire is slowly dying, and my dear, we're still goodbye. But as long as you love me so, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow.
Contained in this is many years of technology. You may have noticed that there's that old antique microphone in front of Nikki Yanofsky. And I was wishing that CBC would just throw that out somewhere so that I could, like maybe find it in the garbage cans. But yeah, from the U47 to this is mixed and distributed on the internet and all that kind of stuff. It's many years of technology here. And in speaking to the many years of technology, I'm going to close out this little glimpse of CBC with a nod to the future generations that may wind up working in audio at CBC, you never know, with this happy little goodbye song.
Yeah! When something's starting out, we'll often say hello.
And when we're in the middle of something, we might say, that's fine.
But when something's almost over and it's winding down,
we'll look at each other and we might say, goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. There are lots of other ways you could say goodbye.
like catch you later, see you soon, tap tap for now, or bye.
It's been real, it's been fun.
I had such a great time.
Take care, peace out.
Oliver Reed, goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. Goodbye.
See you later.
Goodbye.
Au revoir.
Goodbye, 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 goodbye. Goodbye. Very well done. Okay, if everybody could just please leave Studio K, that would be what?
It's party time! Yeah!
Party time!
Yeah! Party! Party! Party!
No,
party!
no,
party!
no,
party! But
no.
no party! No party! No party! No party! No party!
Very good.
Did someone say party?
No, oh my God. Whoa. Did you get a requisition for those streamers? Pick those up and please leave. Quickly now, quickly. Quickly, children. Thank you. My goodness.
Miss Orlando?
Oh, yes.
I heard there's a party for me.
You heard wrong. Please leave making muster.
Okay.
And that's it. And I gather it's party time. I don't know, does anybody have any questions before we head off to the party? Or I guess we should get the mic over here so that...
The Nikki Yanofsky video, it appeared to be a lip sync. Have you ever been asked to stretch or otherwise with the audio to synchronize picture and sound?
Yeah, in the case of the Nikki Yanofsky thing, because I wasn't involved in the video production, I can't speak to exactly how that was done. I suspect some of what you were hearing was live in front of the camera, and some of it was recorded to a playback of the audio. Probably a combination of things was used. And I've worked on many music specials where your first course of action is to go to the video editor and say, can you shift this a little bit? And if that doesn't work, you see how much you can get away with and not ruin the musicality, which usually is not a whole lot. Certainly if it's straight dialogue, yes, you can shift a whole bunch and stretch, do whatever you need to do, and make it look like it's in sync. In the case of these videos, and these videos, believe it or not, I mean, I think they look great, but they are cranked out very quickly for the CBC Music stuff. And the final post-mix on that was literally one day for a 1 hour special. So you don't have a whole lot of time to go into attention to detail, but yeah, that would have been, a lot of it would have been lip sync to a playback. Yep.
For the Olympics, was all of the file transfer done on cable internet, or was satellites used?
To my understanding, the vast majority of it was cable internet. And sorry, I don't have all of the technical specifications for that, but in order to have, this ridiculously low delay time between Toronto and Pyeongchang, I suspect it was newer technology. Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I had a similar kind of question just related to that 2-frame delay and like how you would go about technically achieving that and achieving that reliably, especially if you're dealing with an internet service provider that's on the other side of the world.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they contracted out to get the high bandwidth pipes that went there and came back. And again, that's a great question. And the guys in CBC engineering proper, the real engineers, would be able to answer that for you.
Ron, I could maybe speak to that a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Not in terms of your effort, obviously, but of course.
Yeah, you've been down this path
since
many times.
TSN was embedded with you for the last 2 games, and also because we were also outside the fence in Pyeongchang with Jay and Dan Sports Center, the Jay and Dan edition, as well as our national news. So we were sort of outside the fence and had mounted a sort of a parallel effort. But the same idea, delivering everything via IP back to Toronto and traveling just mainly talent and transducers, to the site, right? The trick is, and Josh was actually most closely connected of people in this room with an engineering effort like this when we did Vancouver. It's the same concept. And the problem basically revolves around trying to find something that's faster than the speed of light. That's the fundamental problem. You find yourself in these odd meetings where people are discussing how egregious it is that the speed of light is so slow. You recall the conversations. But it really has to do with not waiting for return traffic. You basically you have no choice but to exercise things like UDP, and you have to just fire hose the content into the pipe and hope like hell that they're going to catch at the other end. But if you waited for that standard, send a packet, wait for a receipt, send a query to say, are you ready to receive another one, then send another one, then wait for a receipt, you'd be done for. So that's the trick. And Pyeongchang was and Russia before it. We're near worst case scenarios in terms of getting the kinds of pipes you need, because you're talking about minimum sort of 10 gig pipes, ideally with redundant links that are diverse route to getting into each place that you need. Now you can pack a lot of stuff into 10 gig because you're not sending baseband, you're sending at probably J2K, as I recall everything was coming back from Pyeongchang. So you can pack a lot of videos and audio into a small space, but still it's non-trivial to get that kind of bandwidth somewhere. But the trick is just that. You just hope like hell that you've got a fully manageable link. There can't be any intermediaries that are trying to police or manage your data. And it's basically all a trick of natting the whole thing. Right? You're transiting through other people's space, but when the data pops at the other end, it better bloody well look like your traffic, right? And so it is possible, and it's shocking to have, you're in the sub 100 millisecond range. So fast, in fact, that a producer doesn't even think about it. Within seconds of sitting in the control room in Toronto, they're conducting normal operations like they're talking to a studio that's just 100 yards that way. It's pretty terrifying.
Exactly. Well said, thank you.
What is CBC doing to train their engineers for an all IP future?
Now that's an interesting question. And the short answer is they are bringing people in who already have that kind of background. CBC does very little actual in-house training, and when we bring somebody in, we want them to already have a certain amount of experience and knowledge and keen interest in that particular area. I'm very far removed from any of the hiring and recruiting process, but in terms of training, when I first started at CBC, which was not very long ago, only 23 years ago, but we still had an in-house training room to teach people the basics of television, the basics of audio, all that kind of stuff. And you could learn a fair amount in the building and work your way up from being a cable puller to, post audio or cameraman or director, whatever. Although they still, even for audio, expected you to have a rudimentary knowledge of all of the basics. Now they're actually looking for people that have either graduated from Ryerson or Sheridan or one of the accredited courses, and probably has a couple of years of experience in the field before they actually come into our building. So, hope that answers your question.
When I first joined the AES some 30-odd years ago, one of the first events I went to was we did a tour of the building that they were building downtown, and it was a hard hats and safety boots tour. It was in the construction stages, and we watched them build that building. And as we brought people in from down in the United States, various people from the audio industry, we sometimes take them for a tour through the facility, and they were just blown away with what we were doing up here. We have nothing like this in the States, they said at the time, and very complimentary to us. And then we watched as the various Canadian governments tore it apart and basically got rid of most of what they had built down there and turned it into office space, and there were whole floors that were gone. My question on this is the Canadian government now supporting the CBC like it's supposed to be supported, or are they still trying to gut the organization?
Well, now that's a very good question, and it's a very political question, and I'm not supposed to comment on things like this, being a CBC employee. But I will say that was a particularly difficult period of CBC history to work through. Lost a lot of friends who were in the building, one of whom will be on the panel with us tomorrow, and saw some great rooms that had done amazing content and huge history and stuff just get, not just shut down, but like cutting the wings off the Avro Arrow. It was like shut down, destroyed, etc., and then turned into IT space for a computer server or something like that. So it was very disconcerting to live through, and I don't think any of the people that are my age expected to still be at CBC, and in fact had largely planned our early retirement contingent upon what was going to happen in the last election. Well, since the last election, funding has stabilized. There is a huge push still to reduce real estate, a huge push to produce content, but not necessarily within CBC. CBC's business model is that there's way more money for content if it's a co-production, because half of it comes from telefilm then, not all out of the CBC budget. So there's a big push still to do stuff out of house, and the only kinds of things that happen in-house are the things that need to be there, like news, like the quick turnaround, magazine shows and that kind of stuff, and just a few other things that are sort of remnants of the stuff that was there before all of these changes, like Dragon's Den and Rick Mercer up until this year, those kinds of things. What there is a huge push toward, and what there is money for now, is digital content and multi-platform stuff. And my boss, who used to be boss of the whole Toronto Production Center, now answers to the person who is head of digital media production. They've basically leapfrogged over the regular television and radio production because it is seen as being the future, and that's where all of the money's going. Not all of it, but I mean, that's where the future is. So yes, it has stabilized, and it's become a happy place to work again, which is nice.
Going once.
Going twice.
Just for the really tight deadlines that you're working under, I was wondering what type of collaboration tools you use, if multiple people are working on the same Pro Tools session at once, if that's all local, if it's cloud collaboration, or just how you work together with those short deadlines and maximizing efficiency.
Very good question. For the stuff that has super fast turnarounds, and that usually happens on shows that kind of have a formula. There's a lot of planning at the beginning of the season. There are certain ways that we like to lay things out. And the quick turnaround stuff generally tends to happen with us. The editors do the edit, and for a show like Fifth Estate, there might be 3 editors working on the same show, each working on a different segment of it, and all talking to each other. Those segments come in one at a time over the server into Pro Tools. It's one person doing the mix in Pro Tools. The mixes are kept to minimum. In fact, for a show like Fifth Estate, it's only mixed in stereo because when it goes back to the edit suite, which is just a stereo monitoring facility, they have to be able to, at the last second, replace a line of narration because there's a legal fact that changed, or those kinds of things happen all the time, often on the day of broadcast or an hour before broadcast, and has to be changed and resent to the server. So the fast workflow, it's all on servers. They do tag team out people. In audio, because those kinds of shows don't tend to be the things that have, a separate dialogue editor, a separate sound effects editor, separate music editor, etc. All of that stuff is done in the edit suite. It comes into us, we clean it up, do a little bit of value-added sound effect design, that kind of thing, and shoot it back to them in the video suite. If it's for certain other shows, we would actually marry the audio back to video. Like we work in conjunction. You do this at CTV, Bell Media. We've got a Pro Tools suite and an Avid Media Composer. We pull stuff off the Media Composer, send it to Pro Tools, mix it, send it back to Media Composer, marry it to the picture, and then shoot it off back to production where it can be put onto the delivery server. So, yep.
My question is the CBC music library lost, and all the historical video files from all the years of production in Toronto?
That's another interesting and very good question. I would say that for any kind of media, there's a fixed lifespan for most of the physical media, and less so for things like vinyl records, which seem to last forever. But for anything that was on tape, anything that was on CD, anything that was on videotape or digital videotape, all of those things are going to disappear by themselves over time. And so CBC's job in managing those assets, and asset management is a huge part of any broadcaster now, as Mike knows. But there is a team of people that is constantly working to transfer that to whatever the newest and best quality possible system is. Now, years ago, it was transferring all of the analog tapes and films and videotapes to digibeta, which was the best that we had in those days. Now we would think of that as being, well, I guess it's super low quality now because everything is those were just but now everything gets, basically goes onto a server, gets transferred from the server into some kind of linear tape archival format off-site, and usually a couple of different off-site locations, so that if somebody drops a bomb here, it still exists there. There's a lot of redundancy built in. So in terms of have we lost the physical media? Have we gotten rid of the physical media? Yeah. For most of that stuff, it's long gone. But in terms of do we still have that programming content, I believe the vast majority of that is still in existence. And it's a huge resource, which some is owned by CBC, and some of it was sold off a number of years ago to a private company that does libraries and archives kind of stuff. But yeah, it's still out there.
Thank you for presenting. That is, Michael will thank you again, but what you presented is bang on to the stuff that I've been following as well. One of the things I want to add to the CBC's contribution to a lot of the stuff is a lot of Felix's work is being open sourced to the 2110 community.
Felix says to say hello, by the way.
Oh, cheers. Yes. Yes. He's the Montreal guys participate a lot with the EBU. So when the Geneva French guys talk, it's a lot of EBU stuff. So that relationship is very important. And what CBC has done is they've invested a lot of money in researching and trying these technologies over and over and in different ways, and then open sourcing a lot of their developments. So part of that R&D comes back to those who need to consume it, and that is open to other broadcasters around the world. So it's a huge contribution back to the production cycle. So cheers to the CBC on that.
Ron, thank you so much.
My pleasure.